We are back here on the show to talk about the Las Vegas Raiders and their quarterback battle that is still going on through the third week of training camp. It is an interesting one to sort of point out here just because I feel like with the Raiders, they're one of the teams that don't get really enough of the spotlight and enough of the media attention nationally to, bring up as a constant competition that does matter a lot, not just because we're talking about the quarterback spot obviously being so impactful to the success of an NFL team, but because it does a lot to the relationship and the morale of possibly the most important player on the Raiders being Davante Adams. And I say that because this offseason we've seen a lot of news and speculation about Davante Adams potentially leaving and being traded to the New York Jets, sort of sparking that flame, that itch of wanting to play with Aaron Rodgers yet again. And while I do know obviously that it does depend on the Raiders whether or not they decided to trade him at all, but it is something that it has been brought up, and especially after last season's, Netflix series of Receiver, talking about last season, we saw throughout a bunch of scenarios and a bunch of episodes in that show how Davante Adams really reached a limit with the quarterback situation last year with the Raiders, of which I've never really seen him, be so emotional, be so upset in any scenario. Obviously, it was a lot better with the Packers playing with Aaron Rodgers, but even when things got tough, I've never seen him really react like that, cursing off the scenario, cursing off the plays, getting hit constantly, just being frustrated with the lack of production coming from the quarterback spot. Obviously, it all sort of died down a little bit when Antonio Pierce came in, when Jimmy Garoppolo was eventually, benched and they moved on from him, and really started going with Aiden O'Connell. It got a little bit better. The atmosphere sort of changed around the entire organization with Antonio Pierce being there, but now we head into this season still being unsure of what we're going to get out of that spot for the Las Vegas Raiders. And now it is a competition, a pretty even matchup between Gardner Minshew, who they signed this offseason, and Aiden O'Connell from last year. And on that topic, Davante Adams spoke with ESPN recently about the quarterback competition going on, and he said there's pros and cons to not having a timeline on this quarterback battle. But at the end of the day, we get enough reps with both guys, and we are all communicating on this topic. And he also, went on to talk about how he's really paying attention to this entire thing and to a lot of what Gardner Minshew and Aiden O'Connell are doing just throughout practice. He said that he's got his antennas up for everything. He's trying to pick up on every little, nuance that goes into how Aiden O'Connell throws the ball, how it comes out of the hand of Gardner Minshew, how fast each ball is, the placement of everything. Davante Adams really stressed that he is really putting a lot of stock in a lot of these different aspects of quarterback play, because obviously this is going to be a major part in how successful they are in 2024. And the last thing you want if you're a Raiders fan, if you're in that Raiders organization, is to have Davante Adams feeling like he did last year, almost so helpless out there that, tensions start to boil over and he feels like, this scenario, this relationship is just not going to work. And then you get those trade rumors popping up once again, a disgruntled wide receiver. And the Raiders, the last thing they need, obviously, is having distractions like that to their best player on their team. So it is critical that they get this situation, figured out. We've heard reports previously that Davante Adams actually preferred or thought that Aiden O'Connell had the lead up until this point in that quarterback battle, but now, just based on what he said, paying attention to everything so closely now, it seems like it could be a little bit more even. Now, that's not for sure. I haven't seen too many reports on Gardner Minshew, really improving or impressing a lot of people in the organization on how he could potentially overtake Aiden O'Connell in this. But going back to what Davante Adams said about the pros and the cons of having no timeline essentially for this quarterback battle, you look at some of those pros and cons and you look at some of the positives of having this extended time with each quarterback. You get more time to really evaluate each guy and really make sure in all scenarios that they are the one quarterback that you believe can get you to improve in 2024. And then also it's pretty even throughout the duration of, training camp. You don't have a guy that's designated for the ones, a guy that's designated for the number two, offense in training camp. You have both guys probably splitting the repetitions with the first team offense pretty evenly. So that's another thing that could benefit your understanding of who will end up being the quarterback. And then also, you give more time specifically to Gardner Minshew to sort of settle in, get to know the offense, and then really have a shot of trying to prove to the Raiders that he could potentially be that starting quarterback. But on the other side, the negative of it, splitting reps, I never am too big a fan of it just because I believe you don't really get the ideal amount of chemistry with one guy knowing that he's going to be the guy to throw you the football all throughout 2024. You can't really work on perfecting the timing of everything with one guy just because you don't really know if he's going to end up winning the competition. So that's one thing. And the other thing that I think is pivotal to the negative side of this is that because you have so much time, it can be looked at as a positive, but also when you have too much time, almost it seems like you're really scrambling through everything. You have almost too much time to decide what makes one quarterback better than the other. And I just brought up a little comparison up here for you guys just to show you what we're sort of dealing with here with each guy in terms of production and yards and touchdowns and interceptions just off of last year. Minshew takes the lead in yards, in touchdowns as well, but also in interceptions. That's something to watch if he's going to be your starter. Aiden O'Connell played less games than Gardner Minshew, obviously with Anthony Richardson going down so early. Minshew got most of the reps throughout the entire year, but you could still look at those numbers and think that they are pretty close and relative to, depending on how many games that each quarterback played, it does make a difference. And what I believe now is trying to separate these two guys at least a little bit here going into the third week of training camp is that each of them brings something different that, could make them the number one quarterback. You look at Gardner Minshew, he brings the experience coming from various different scenarios, but also Aiden O'Connell has a different sort of, experience with being on the Raiders already and also having that connection with Davante Adams already in place. That could give him the potential edge as well. But what's really, a driving point to all of this, I believe, is that everyone's talking about the starting quarterback, right? And that's the thing that matters most, obviously. But what I think is funny about these two guys is that not only does it matter who the starting quarterback is, it really matters a lot who the backup is in this situation. Because if I'd explain it this way, I think that both of these guys feel very comfortable being the backup quarterback. And then if they're needed, they're able to, get in the mindset where they know they're the backup quarterback. They can go in there and be temporarily very good or be at least adequate enough to be the starting quarterback for a set amount of time. And of course, Aiden O'Connell did it for a shorter amount of time last year than Gardner Minshew. But Gardner Minshew has almost built up his legacy, his resume of being a reliable backup that could come in and carry this offense, knowing that he might not be the guy going forward. And I don't know if that's exactly what their mindset is, but usually the scenarios that each of these quarterbacks have found themselves in is that they are the backups. They come in knowing that there's not that much pressure on them because they know they're the backup, right? If that makes sense. So I think finding out who the backup quarterback is could be just as important, almost, not completely at the same level, but almost as important as who the starter is, just because say it's Aiden O'Connell who you decide is a starter and he doesn't play that well in the regular season, if you decide to bench Aiden O'Connell early on and sort of give up on him early on, you bring in Minshew, then you can't really go back on that decision to bring in Aiden O'Connell back in, even if Minshew doesn't really impress you that much more. I fear that because they haven't been in this scenario too often, being benched and being in a spot where you get your dream scenario, right? You're the starting quarterback, but then you get benched. We've never seen these guys in those scenarios where they deal with it at all. So we don't know if they're going to deal with it in a positive way. If you bench Aiden O'Connell and kind of swing and take a big blow of his ego, of his personal morale, it could affect him going forward. And then if Gardner Minshew isn't as that much better than Aiden O'Connell, then you have a real scenario where you don't really know what to do, whether you bring back Aiden O'Connell. Is he too messed up morally to come back after being benched? Or the same way goes with Gardner Minshew and, vice versa, trying to bring him back in after benching him. I think that's a pretty niche scenario where the backup quarterback definitely doesn't matter in this scenario as well for the Raiders, and trying to figure all of this out. It's going to take time. The preseason games are going to let us know a lot more on who's really ready to step into that lead role, but I assume they're going to get a bunch of split carries once the preseason starts, so we'll talk about that more as the week goes on. Again, a reminder, the first weekend of the preseason is happening this upcoming weekend. And on that note, we're going to transition to the last topic on today's show on the preseason again, talking about Jaden Daniels being named the starter to start in that preseason game on Saturday. We're going to go into that, what head coach Dan Quinn had to say about it, but also why they haven't named officially a starting quarterback yet up until this point. They've been kept pretty quiet about it, and we're going to speculate why that is. After this short break, we'll be right back.